Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for June 5th, 2017. We'll begin with the special order calendar. Continued hearing items. Item number 1, 41350BZ, 691 East 149th Street, the Bronx.
Hey, they requested an adjournment, but there was a, but to clarify, they mentioned that there had been a hearing. The last hearing was in September, but actually we did discuss this case in March. And we discussed that the applicant would subdivide the tax lot and provide a zoning lot description and ownership statement, which is what we've been waiting for all this time, okay, or a lot of this time.
Okay. Item number, I'm sorry, I didn't come. No, go. Item number 2, 70459BZ, 53 East 177th Street, the Bronx.
They also requested an adjournment, but they did provide photos of the progress on the site improvement. And I just wanted to note that they should repair the broken curb around the photo that's showing the fencing. Anybody else notice other things that they should take care of as long as, no?
No, I have to see they're making the progress. Some of the projects take much longer, so.
Yeah. Speak up. Because, I'm sorry. There's a curb. There's a photograph showing fencing, but it shows that the curb is all crumbled underneath the fencing, so that should be.
Adjournment, so they may not.
Vice Chair, you?
Yeah, so just to let them know.
It's not on. It's on.
It's on, but it's just, she was talking quietly. I want to make sure that people, because I sometimes listen and we can't, everybody isn't so audible, so.
Item number 3, 37788BZ, 14564 Liberty Avenue, Queens.
Okay, this was a compliance hearing where once advised of needing to comply, the property owner really jumped in and took care of things. So they submitted photos showing signs that are now posted to prevent the use of the front area for anything other than parking, and signs that say no work is to be done in that area or on the sidewalk. Anybody else?
I just have a little bit of the business operation question, and that may lead to an issue that was raised. They had mentioned that the customers have been notified not to use the sidewalk for fabricating or using it for any cutting, and I wanted to know.
Customers?
Yes. I think there was a comment in the document, and so I just want to know, does this facility only provide steel, or do they also do some customization at the request of the customers? And
Wait a minute, customers don't cut on the sidewalk.
That's what they did say.
that's what it said.
They
on
said
the
their
document.
customers cut on the
Yes.
Yeah,
sidewalk?
they would
That's
buy
what they
it, and then
said,
they
and
would
they
take
would-
it to the sidewalk, and then they would use it. So I assume that the service is included in this facility. So
What service?
the cutting of the steel is provided on site. I assume that, but that's not very clearly referred in the document. So I would like a clarification. Is that part of the service that is being provided, and does that occur frequently and on site, and where? And I'm assuming that is happening within the site. And
Jeez.
this is kind of all that
You
customer.
buy like wood at Lowe's and they like cut it.
They cut it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they don't say, here's the saw, walk over to the saw and cut the
It's
wood.
to the trade, right? Like
Yeah.
you were worked somewhere where you need to cut steel occasionally, but you don't need to have your own steel cutting shop in your own thing. You go here.
And they cut it.
This is not an equipment that you carry with you. So I'm just surprised, so I just want clarification on that.
I can't imagine. You let outsiders use your equipment and
Yeah.
risk themselves on your equipment.
Exactly.
No. Okay. Anyway.
Item number 4, 12093BZ, 222-19 Linden Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, one second. Okay, they provided photos to show planting in place and the area cleaned up, and they also provided a lot of information about the particular plant that the arborvitae that was planted. So I think they've done as much as we can expect them to do. And we can have conditions about maintaining the site and so on. Okay, everyone?
Item number 5, 17494 BZ, 9907 Roosevelt Avenue, Queens.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Double tasking. The applicant submitted copies of pre-61 permits to, that allowed the installation of a ground sign at the site. The permits appear to be for the structure, but do not indicate whether they're for business or advertising sign. Determining whether the sign is legal at the site is really DOB's job. As we discussed at the last hearing in 2010, no fewer than 13 violations were issued for the sign, and all of these were dismissed. We did ask at the last hearing on what basis they were dismissed, but we should note in our resolution, I think, that the BSA approval does not include the outdoor advertising sign, and that it is subject to compliance with DOB standards for non-conforming signs, so it's just not in our domain. Sign calculations for the business signs showing they don't exceed C1 regulations were provided. I believe there was an update on that also. I think the site looks much better than it did at the start of the hearing process. I still see damaged paving and barbed wire, and the applicant's representative indicates that landscaping will be installed as well. And this morning, I think there was a submission showing a few little shrubs here and there, and the tiniest bush.
Tree.
That's a tree bush. What was that?
It was like, where is the tree?
That was, I actually didn't understand.
'Cause
what
it looks
that-
like
a weed cropped up from a hole.
Right, and now they're replacing a weed.
With a little tiny bush that's gonna die. And it was, I also thought the slatting at the residential property line, which is a mixed, they just like had some slats laying around and they installed them. So they're all mixed, it's haphazard, it really doesn't look good. We also need photos of, so we'll need photos of the repaired paving, the landscaping, and the fencing. There's also barbed wire on the top of the fence that needs to be removed. And the sidewalk in front of the site is cracked, and that's the job of the property owner to maintain. At the last hearing, we also mentioned striping, but I'm not sure whether that's necessary. I don't know why. Then the subject of the portable toilet came up again on this site. The statement of fact states that the owner has found an off-site location, but we've learned that it needs to be from OSHA, basically, that it needs to be very close and it has to be available to the employees at all times. So we should find out what the location is and what the situation is with like key control or however. There's also a letter from a portable toilet company stating the use in this case is permitted. Are they proposing to bring it back? I just didn't really understand what, it seemed like they were arguing two places. And, you know, this is just, it's sort of out of the BSA's domain to figure this out. It just seems distressing to me that there isn't any real clear direction to businesses about what you're supposed to do once you're beyond temporary. And there doesn't seem to be really any guidance. Anybody else on this?
Well, they submitted some information today, and they're saying that the signage is 3 times the frontage, but in
It
a,
doesn't exceed 3 times the frontage.
doesn't
yeah.
exceed, but it really, the maximum is 150 square feet.
Right.
So that's incorrect, and none of it can be illuminated. Without the advertising sign, I think they comply, but they keep saying they have 2 signs, and in all the photos, I haven't seen the second sign.
Right.
So where's the second sign?
I'm assuming the second sign is the one that's on the trailer?
Oh, I don't know.
Because in
they
the
said they were
sign
going to reduce
document,
the
sign document,
size.
one of the sign diagram showed those 2, but it wasn't consistent. So that is one thing in the drawing we need to make sure it's consistently showing the 2 signs. and clearly marked also in the sign. And I agree with you.
And I think they should put the landscaping on the plans.
Yeah. And in terms of that sign, when I look at that photograph, and I think they said the sign's 24 square feet, something like that, and I'm like, looking at that, that is not a
Oh, the one-
24
the-
square
the
foot
one in the
sign.
corner?
Yeah.
No, not the advertising sign, the sign that was provided in the photo today that sits on top of the little shack.
Yeah.
I'm looking at, the shack has to be at least 9 feet tall, otherwise you don't have head clearance, right? And
Yeah.
so the sign is taller than the shack and wider than the shack, so I'm looking at it, it's like, that's a 9 or a 10-foot high sign that's at least 12 feet wide. How's that a 24 square foot sign?
Well, they did say they were going to replace one.
Right.
Maybe that's the
Well, so
one.
then they,
So
yeah,
they
maybe
should
that's it.
confirm, they should confirm the existing signs and the proposed signs for both the entrance and on the trailer.
Yeah. And then if there's a sign that's going to be replaced, we should understand what it is, that the total is correct, and then replace it now, right? Okay. Okay. Okay.
New cases, item number 6, 13995BZ, 250 East 54th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, there was a community board recommendation that was conditional, but it was a PDF form, and this community board didn't attach its recommendation to the back, so I don't know what the condition was. And so, but we also have fire department sign off. Other than that, I don't know.
They said they have massage, but they didn't, and they said they included licenses, but they didn't send in licenses.
And then I had a question, they got a letter of substantial compliance and extension of term in 2006, removing the pool.
Right.
But in 2007, they got a C of O with the pool.
Oh, the CVO still says pool, okay.
So, in the subcellar. So I don't know why they did
Because there
that.
isn't a pool. So it's just-
Supposedly, there's no pool.
Right. Okay.
Oh, and they want to amend their hours.
Yes,
Very slightly.
Yeah.
Open a little earlier.
right.
You want a photograph or something?
No, why did they get a C of O
The C of O
with
is,
the pool, stating that there's a pool when the year before, they got an extension of time with no pool? Or, no, they got a letter of substantial
they should
compliance.
obviously amend the C of O, but that's a lot of work for, maybe they get a notice of no objection or something from DOB just to clarify, so at least it's on record that they corrected the C of O.
Well, I was also wondering if that requires another PA permit for the subcellar. Because they have one for the cellar.
Okay, so then, that's a fire department issue too. And that's a note to you, to council, our council. The council
Yeah.
sitting over here to amend the hours.
Hours, yes,
Right,
hours.
okay. Okay,
Go.
yeah.
Item number 7, 18708BZ, 1247 38th Street, Brooklyn.
The March 28th, so I'm not sure if we have notice on this still. We
No.
postponed the hearing for failure to give notice.
We reached out, there was notice, there was some conversation, there was notice given for the last hearing, which we were like, that's not how you do it. There were some mistakes made. Our recommendation, we talked to both the council person and the community board. They understood this was coming, and issues with this, because it's not this is, it's an amendment, so there's no notice to the neighbors. So the community board and the
Oh.
council person are key to this. They wrote it.
Okay, really?
Yes.
Yeah,
spoke to-
terrifying.
So we're going to hear it.
So we're going to
Okay.
hear it, even,
Yeah.
okay. I'd like to hear an explanation from the owner and architect of record why the building under construction does not comply with the BSA-approved plans, and why construction continues in spite of an expired variance. The statement of fact states that permits are valid. I don't understand how that could be, because the variance expired. I see the permit was renewed in April 2017, but I don't understand how. I don't know that DOB is aware that there is a BSA action on this, because there's nothing anywhere on BIS that indicates it, and there's nothing on a C of O that indicates that this is a BSA action. It's the same, and interestingly, it's the same permit number since 2007, before the initial BSA approval. So what they've been doing is just renewing a permit that's unrelated to the BSA approval, and that's why DOB would be unaware of this. So that seems willful to me. And so as a way of getting around BSA compliance. I'd like to know if the plans were revised at the DOB to reflect the current construction. And because I don't see any post-approval amendments on this on file since 2012. So they should provide a copy of the deed and the New York City land disposition agreement for Lot 109. They should provide a copy of the HPD-approved drawings that are referred to in the land disposition agreement as well. They should provide a copy of the 2010 negative declaration that's referred to in the LDA, which affects noise, air quality, and hazmat. There's an E designation that applies actually to the block and lot, both lots, and describe the extent of compliance with its terms, and provide current photos of the Lot 109 portion of the site. They should add to the drawings to show the required E designation requirements for noise, air quality, and hazmat, and to tell us the status with respect to obtaining a notice of satisfaction from DEP. They provided a tech memo that concludes without analysis that the rooftop play area will not be a significant source of noise, and that mitigation will not be necessary. They need to provide backup for this assumption or conclusion. The memo also states that the area in the rear is a play area, but the LDA requires that it be for parking for 12 cars, and the BSA resolution says that it's parking for 15 cars, so actually it should be for 15 cars unless we modify it. They need to provide a zoning lot description and ownership statement and a certification of parties in interest. They need to provide the most recent set of DOB-approved drawings. The layout, I note, has changed significantly since the last approval. And to cut to the chase, it's obvious to me that the 3 lobbies at the rear of the building, 2 of which lead to separate elevator lobbies, each lobby of which is provided with a coat check room called storage, and each lobby of which connects directly to separate lobbies at the cellar level with men's toilet stalls on one side and women's toilet stalls on the other, which cellar lobbies connect directly to the 12,000 square foot multi-purpose room that is provided with a 2,800 square foot meat kitchen, will be used as a commercial catering facility, and that the 8,600 square foot lunchroom beneath it that is attached to the 2,200 square foot dairy kitchen is probably a lunchroom for the kids, since the separate rear elevators don't continue down to it. Meanwhile, 9th graders have their own lunchroom and warm-up kitchen on the 5th floor, so the demand on that lunchroom is less because of that. And the 2010 resolution, I know from BSA, expressed similar fears about the use of the multi-purpose spaces, stating that a condition is that it not be used for commercial catering. Since the zoning district allows for mixed uses, the plans must be revised to reflect the use of those spaces for commercial catering and must comply with all zoning requirements and code requirements for that use. since educational deference does not extend to commercial functions. The applicant should discuss with DOB how evening functions for commercial purposes and daytime functions for school purposes should be handled. So it's like a dual activity building, and it needs to have C of O and all that stuff for dual activities. With respect to the elimination of the front yard setback at the 5th floor, I don't see the programmatic need, as these are offices. With respect to the rear yard equivalent reduction, I need more to understand why the prior set of plans don't work for classroom sizes, et cetera. Since the resolution states that 600 square feet was the desired minimum size for classrooms, and these classrooms exceed that number significantly, I don't understand why now you need to take up more space for that. I do understand that there's an increase in preschool enrollment from 195 to 272, and a desire for smaller class sizes from 21 to 17 per class. But also the multiple lobbies, 4 at the 1st floor, take up what could otherwise be preschool classrooms. And the 2011 resolution states that the school program required that preschool and kindergarten be kept on the same floor, which is a preferred grouping that, quote, helps the yeshiva meet the requirements of the New York City Health Code and the federal Head Start performance standards. No explanation was given for the need for, so now they're split on 2 floors. So I don't understand that original programmatic need. And no explanation was given also for the need for wider hallways at the upper floors, which they use as one of their arguments for why they need more space. Further, it appears the prior approvals assumed the high school age students would be in the building, so those from the 9th to 12th grade. The EAS also states there would be 225 10th to 12th graders and 100 9th graders, but the drawings show the school only goes to the 9th grade. That means many more bus trips and drop-offs, so it's really a different analysis now when there's more little kids. The increase in preschool and kindergarten enrollment probably implicates bus and drop-off and demand, which should also be addressed. And the prior approval assumed 4 buses would remain parked in front of the school, and as we've been talking about on many of these other schools, I'd like to know whether the buses can be parked away from the school to alleviate drop-off and pickup issues. The prior resolution acknowledges the eventual acquisition of Lot 109 to be used for parking of 15 cars and for bus parking. So that's really what it should be used for, and not play area and not reception area for catering. The space comparison chart should show floor areas of each use under the proposed and prior plans, and break down the students and uses in the same way on the prior program as in the proposed, so we can compare apples to apples. They did sort of this summary review of the prior and a more detailed review of the proposed, so you can't tell what the differences are. They should also provide information on how parking will be handled for all uses and where the buses will be stored following drop-off. The prior EAS assumes 38 spaces provided for the project, some on-site and some nearby. I don't know where those are, they don't show us. They should provide information on the site plan about how the rear space will be used. They don't even actually show us the rear space on the drawings. They should show the curb cuts. Also, where is the disabled access from 38th Street? Those are up steps. And also provide the building code sections for the required safe room areas, because there's all of this huge space devoted to safe rooms. That's the first time we've seen safe rooms on any of these projects. So, don't know what that is, other than there's a need, big lobbies. And also, where do the preschoolers play? And if they play on the roof, has DOB and fire department signed off on this? Because that's above the 3rd floor, and there's an issue about egress of tiny kids from the 3rd floor. That's it. Anybody else?
I had questions about the street wall height. Originally, we granted them 49 feet, then they came for an amendment, and they got 55 feet, and now they are requesting 70 feet, and the steel is already in place for that. And I don't think they have shown, the programmatic need for no setback, and that it's in the neighborhood character.
Anybody else?
Item number 8, 4610BZ, 1401 Sheepshead Bay Road, Brooklyn.
So I just like clarification that the building is actually occupied with the uses that were anticipated in the special permit, and whether the 8 spaces that were supposed to be parking spaces are actually provided on site, like show us photos. I'm a little confused about how the subject site obtained a final C of O on October 3rd, 2011, even though at the time of its issuance, there was no parking in place at 2554 East 16th Street. The building on that site didn't receive even a demo permit until January 2012, so months after the C of O was issued. And once parking was installed, it was installed without permits. Because that C of O from 2011 predates the BSA grant, which is a month later, it indicates that there are 69, the C of O indicates there are 69 spaces located off-site, 8 on-site, and of course, no reference is made to the BSA grant. The minimum as-of-right space count is 77 spaces, so that's how they broke that up. I'd like to know if the landscaping, will the landscaping be provided at the parking lot as required by the ZRD1 denial? And whether there's violation information that was provided, but it's 2 years old. There are active DOB elevator violations at the subject site, and but I don't see any fines due, so usually not that much of an issue for us. There is a 2012 stop work order on the 16th Street site for work without permits. I'd like to know what the situation is. It looks like the first permit was pulled for this work in 2016. There are open ECB violations and fines owing on that site in excess of $6,600 that must be paid before we can move forward. They should provide approved plans of the parking lot showing the number of cars and stackers. Anybody else? No? No?
Well, just our resolution previously said that the layout of the parking lot was going to be as approved by DOB. And yeah, I would just like to know how they got away with, how they managed to not do the landscaping. Because as you said, I think it was something regarding grandfathered use. But we'll see.
Grandfathered use?
Well, that's what they were explaining in their ZRD1 or arguing.
Yeah.
That there was parking grandfathered on the site previously.
On the other site?
On the off-site.
Yeah, on the off-site,
Yeah.
right. But nevertheless, the parking wasn't there, it wasn't in place at the time that the C of O was issued.
No, I think the C of O was issued because they showed complying plans, that they were like a first floor parking lot and a cellar parking lot, and it was all attended,
Yeah, yeah.
And then they came to us for a permit.
Right. Or maybe that's how they convinced them, because it was only a month out to approval, and they could have said, it's the next hearing will be approved.
Or I think it was certain spaces in the building could not be occupied until they complied
okay.
with the
That could
parking
be.
requirements also.
Right, so I didn't look through the TCOs. Did you find TCOs like that?
No, I didn't, no.
Yeah, because sometimes you'll see that on a TCO. All right.
Item number 9, 22813BZ, 157 Columbus Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, we do have fire department sign off as of May 31. The community board approved on condition, and we're very strong about the conditions because this is a CrossFit gym. I I should read, let's see. It says that they need to obtain a TCO with the 18 conditions that were on the BSA's resolution included, that no activities take place in the public thoroughfare, that they will maintain compliance with the 18 conditions, and then lists the hours of operation and discusses the sound attenuation measures. I'd like to know about the noise attenuation measures that were actually installed. And given that the community board, given that the community board had so many concerns, I really think that the immediate neighbors need to be given an opportunity to testify on this. So the next hearing, like we've done with others of this, should be posted in the lobby to invite people to speak. And then with respect to the community board's comment about not using the public thoroughfare, we have a CrossFit gym around the corner from us at 250 Broadway. And when you're, what?
It's a boxing gym.
That's the one that has people
Right
running
down the
around?
street. Yeah, it's a
Okay,
boxing
With
it's equivalent concept,
Yeah.
okay? So, and it's crazy when
In the
when they
morning,
come
forget
out.
it.
What? I mean, I don't know who regulates this. It's like, it's really just,
You're dodging
it's
them
really
in the morning,
disruptive. Pedestrians get hit by runners. I mean, it's threatening. It's like, why can't they have, that's why they invented treadmills. Or running tracks inside.
People can run on the street, Madam Chair.
People can,
But
no.
I understand the idea of a business.
Yes, no, your business model that is using
Yes,
city streets,
that's
I'm not convinced that that's
It's part of their
correct.
program. They run around with weights, big
Yes.
weights.
They run around with weights or their boxing gloves, and that's those guys, but the CrossFits often send out more people and they run en masse. And I'm not sure that that's a true statement that you can have a business that relies on use of city streets without getting certain kinds of permits and things like that. So it's different than if you go out for a run. It's different, it's really a different thing, so.
Well, it was definitely an issue the first time around.
Yes.
When this
Yes.
first came to us, the neighbors were very upset about that.
Yes,
They also need to provide proof that they're not using the residentially zoned portion that was originally their PCE use, that they had to
Yes.
seal up.
Yeah.
oh, they
So,
had to seal
They had
it.
to seal it with a
'Cause it's-
wall.
Part of it is in an RA.
It's in an RA.
Right,
So-
right. But the plans don't show anything in the
there.
R side.
And they didn't give
right?
us any photos beyond
Right.
that door.
Okay.
So they really have to show us that it's really empty.
The letter that we got from the residential condo, while it does not state any issues, but it would be helpful for us if the applicant can respond to those by saying how the hours of operations are being maintained, or what are the, so,
What do you mean, how the hours?
no, if they're, I'm not how,
Well,
that they're meeting the hours
okay.
of operation, and then the same thing about the not being in the residential section, just kind of walk.
Show compliance
respond.
with the 18
Right.
points, basically,
Yeah.
even though some of them are standard,
And
right?
just respond to those issues so that we know whether
Okay.
it's being addressed or not.
Oh, I would like them to tell us if they've received any noise or vibration complaints. They proposed a certain set of noise attenuation measures, and I believe they have to show whether or not they've been working.
Right.
Also, they have, I guess they're medicine balls, or the other things, the little weights,
Yeah, the kettlebells.
the kettleballs, and I see these unprotected columns. So my question was, well, how are they using these kettleballs,
Throw them against the wall.
Right. So, I mean, there was nothing really done to do sound attenuation of the walls, except for one wall that was next to, I think, the residential laundry room.
Oh, sorry, it's medicine balls they throw against the wall, kettleballs they swing.
Oh, okay,
To
so
throw your
maybe, all right, well,
shoulders
just
at
if there's anything thrown against the wall or how they're used.
Yeah.
Then, one thing I was questioning was that this community board said they want the facility to close at 10 o'clock on weekdays and 8 o'clock on weekends, and our hours of operation was 9:30 on weekdays and 6 o'clock on weekends. So it was almost like, well, aren't they complying with that? Because why would the community board ask them to close later than our grant?
Right.
So it made me question whether they're complying
Abiding.
with the grant.
And that was also raised in the residential condo letter, so we just need to make sure.
But I really do want to have the lobby posted so that individual tenants can be aware of it, so. Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 10, 232-15A, 840 West End Avenue, Manhattan. We have to defer this. They haven't received landmarks, as far as I know, landmark sign-off, and they were supposed to submit a status report on the compliance of the building, and they're asking for July 18th. Item number 11, 2016-4170A, 809-811 Broadway, we received a letter requesting withdrawal.
That's an appeal, so they've withdrawn their appeal. Okay.
New cases, item number 12, 2016-4263A, 235 Industrial Loop, Staten Island.
Okay. We do have on record copies of their notice of filing with the various agencies and notice of hearing sent to the agencies. I note there's no record that the applicant sent copies of updated materials to the entities, which is required. We do need fire department. The fire department apparently looked and does want some modifications made to the drawings. The application actually contradicts itself internally by stating in one place that the building will be fully sprinklered and in another that it won't be. I believe fire department always requires sprinklers on these GCL 36 buildings, especially in an industrial zone, but really anywhere. They submitted a 2011 memo from city planning referring to an extinguishment of a 40-foot wide, 3,200-foot long sewer easement and a portion of a city topo map that doesn't show much except that there are no roads. The map isn't dated or tied to anything else. I'm not sure what the significance of this is to our case, where that easement was relative to our site. Not sure what that's about. On the 2016 survey and the proposed site plan, there's an area that is hatched that's called accepting area. What is that? And accepting, cars have to pass over it in order to get to the site, so I just don't understand what that is. Could understand if it was an accepting area, or like accepting. And in a survey, that sounds like the surveyor didn't look at it or couldn't get there, or I just don't know what that was. This is an existing operation that is being modified with this new building. I couldn't tell whether DOB would require builder's pavement plan because it's an existing use, even though it doesn't have permits. So I couldn't really figure out how buildings department is going to be handling this. The applicant submitted copies of access and maintenance easements and a DOT sidewalk waiver without showing us where in the documents the relevant issues are. I'm mentioning this because you can't submit us a stack of legal documents and expect us to go through them and figure out what they are. You, applicant, has to do that. So otherwise, we're doing your legal work for us. So with all the easement submissions, it should include a map that shows us how it tracks the meets and bounds description. That way, we don't have to do it because, and you know, what's the point of providing an easement if we don't even know where it is? There are 2 open DOB violations for illegal occupancy and construction of a roof over containers. I'm curious if this is the structure that's going to be removed. I wasn't sure what the violation referred to. And those were my comments. Anybody else?
It appears that they have some parking in the fire lane, according to the photos in front of
Parking
the
in the
site.
fire lane? What?
Yeah, there's no parking signs and there's cars parked. So So how are they going to deal with that? And then they have a nice little landscape strip in front of the site, and I hope they're going to keep it
Yeah, it's so sweet.
with rose bush, and they should put it on the plans.
Okay. It's on the survey, but. Anybody else?
Should say the borough president had no comments?
Did the borough president have comments? No.
No, he had no comment.
I don't think
on
we did.
Friday?
Oh, right, the borough president is still, oh, this is industrial loop. They did have comments, but I don't remember what they are. Where are they?
Did the borough
Didn't have any
president?
comments.
Did not have comment,
comments.
did not, okay. Okay, that's important, okay, yes, true, because we reach out.
Zoning calendar decision items, item number 13, 27315BZ, 11043 160th Street, Queens.
Okay. They did submit deeds showing the property was held in single ownership since at least 1967, not that they made it easier on us to figure that out. I wish the applicant had put that information in a chart form, because it's just a gigantic stack of deeds. So with respect to the other properties in the study that we asked them to provide backup that those are owned in common ownership or something, that one, I am not going through those deeds.
It did show that
They
they were
did?
in common, yeah, they were either related, like maybe a brother, sister, or husband and wife.
But they didn't make any, they didn't put it together in a chart. They gave
No,
us a
no, they
stack
didn't.
and
You
they
had to
gave us a
read-
map.
Right, you had to read through
Right.
the
Yes.
thing, but in reading through it, yes, it
I agree
did
with
show.
your point that in
Yes.
future it will be
It would be
helpful.
very nice.
Yes.
It would be helpful to have that as in the appendix with a chart that
Right.
shows that.
It's more than, it would be helpful, it's required. The board shouldn't be spending its time reviewing every single deed and figuring out if Esther is related to Selma, et cetera, et cetera. We should not be doing that. That is for council to do, the applicant to do, and it's required. Because it, helpful means, oh, it's going to be helpful, therefore I won't. So, okay, so the commissioners went through the deeds and figured out that in fact it supported the idea. Thank you for doing that. My main remaining question though is, which isn't a small one, if the property, if the subject property had a building on it until 2009, which was demolished apparently by HPD because they are the names on the demo permit, which I don't totally get because the chain of title shows there's individual owners, but the permit was issued to HPD, so maybe Shampa, you can explain that. But I still like to know, if it was demolished in 2009 by HPD, then why can't it be rebuilt on the original footprint under 54 or 41?
I can't answer the latter one.
Right.
But the first one, the former one is typically in the city of New York, if there are any buildings, private or city-owned, deemed in hazardous condition and can be affecting the safety of the neighboring building, as an emergency measure, HPD does pull the permit and then demolish.
But wouldn't there be a hazard, unsafe building notice then against the property on the DOB website?
Honestly speaking, I don't know that detail, but
Yeah.
there are complaints that would come from the community board or from the local residents or whichever multiple ways that those issues would percolate up to the point where it would be deemed, or sometimes FDNY may also call and say, this is hazardous and, you know, a safety issue and it needs to be taken. So it has been done on emergency priority basis.
Okay, so I was just confused because normally you'll see an unsafe building notice someplace in the history of the building, and you didn't see that here. But I'm still at the question of why couldn't it then, which then goes to, is there really a need for those variants if you could build back the house that was there like all the other houses?
So I guess we'll reopen.
Yeah, we're going to need to reopen. And I know that this is a closed hearing, but that occurred to me in reviewing, actually, a letter from opposition. I think it was actually the city council's letter. I was looking at that, and then I was trying to go through all the points. So just for everybody's information, last week, the mayor signed legislation that requires the BSA to do a lot of new things, or old things, but articulate them in new ways, right? And one of them is to go through all of the reasons why we vote for something, sometimes in sort of opposition to community concerns. So in going through every single community concern and responding, I found that one. So, okay. Okay.
Continued hearing items, item number 14, 24014BZ, 1620 Shore Boulevard, Brooklyn.
Okay, nothing was submitted on this, but apparently the architect is going to come and talk his way through it. That's not great, because we don't have any time to review the submission or anything, so I don't know what to say, but that's what we were told.
Well, I think they had given some answers like a long time ago.
A long time ago.
So, you know, in terms of how they were going to lift the building, I do believe they sent us a letter about that, and they show it on the plans of how they're going to keep the existing foundations are concrete. They're going to separate the first floor in the building and lift that, and they're going to put in, you know, like, not new, but wider foundation walls after they've jacked up the building. And so I believe they're keeping the first floor walls and the first floor joists, so I believe they discussed that previously.
Okay, so that, I guess maybe the issue then is to, because at the last hearing, there was a change in representation, right? So the new representative came and then didn't necessarily address all of the issues because we had been spending so much time with that easement subject, we'd sort of lost sight of the substance, right? So maybe for tomorrow, what would be helpful is the representative goes through the videotapes and listens to what the concerns were, some of which we articulated in the last hearing, and make sure that all of those are addressed so they can go back, you know, back in the day you asked, this is how we responded, because it's now like all of these different threads of information that haven't been tied together. I think that so they were supposed to establish that the existing rear yard condition is legal non-complying. I'm not sure.
They're not keeping the...
They're not, okay.
They're taking off the extension, and they're lining up with the adjacent rear yard. And I believe that was shown in the Sanborn maps, that they lined up. So they're taking off what was like a boiler room at the rear.
Right. Oh, I know what the problem was. They didn't get an objection, because they're still extending into the rear yard.
They were supposed to go get the objection.
Yeah, and I don't know that, well, we didn't have
believe they
anything.
did.
I don't
I
know
hope
if they
they
got the
did.
objection.
Yeah,
Right, so that's the thing, and those were questions from the last hearing.
yeah.
So that's why I want them to go through it as opposed to us figuring out when they submitted what, right? Okay. Okay.
Item number 15, 12815BZ through 13015BZ, 680, 682, 684 Van Duzer Street, Staten Island.
Okay, they requested an adjournment because they're still working on the adjacent property access issue.
Item number 16, 16815BZ, 58 Grattan Street, Brooklyn. It's a great Grattan.
Okay, the parking study was revised and is still based on seeker technical standards, conservatively using Dumbo and Williamsburg EIS and census tract data for general retail and general office use. The peak demand is 9 parking spaces from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. There are 46 to 100 on-street parking spaces that were observed. to be available during peak hours, peak demand of between 2 and 3 p.m. Given that the site is too small really to accommodate any parking at all, and there is significantly more on-street parking than is indicated by the demand study, and this is a variance as opposed to a special permit, I think that the waiver is appropriate. I understand they're going to be doing some actual survey of the immediate neighborhood, so to zero in even deeper than what the EISs did for their demographic. They also revised the structure, which I let Commissioner Montanez discuss, to favor a mat slab foundation, but that doesn't seem to have been represented in cost savings. I think we've advised them to bring their engineer and financial analyst to the hearing, so they should. With respect to the size of the requested waiver, although the floor area ask is relatively large, the building on this tiny lot is only 1 story taller than what's permitted as of right, and the building height was reduced by the applicant at the last hearing to 42 foot 8 inches and 4 stories from 53 foot 8 inches and 4 stories by reducing the floor-to-floor heights. And the revised project roof height now aligns with the parapet height of the neighbor. I think also that from a public policy perspective, encouraging commercial uses to remain in M1 districts is desirable and preferable to residential conversions where feasible. So if this bit of extra floor area, which cannot be perceived from the street or anywhere else because they're complying with rear yard requirements, will enable a commercial enterprise to succeed here, then I think it's the right way to go and should be encouraged. Anybody else on this?
I agree with your statement. I think where we stand with this revised project in terms of the layout and configuration is more in, the building form is more in the context of the neighborhood, and it continues to allow similar type of uses that would be allowed in a manufacturing zone. And again, the parking waiver is minimal, I think, given the nature of the size of the site, so I'm comfortable with the project where it stands.
The financials addressed the remaining issues that I had by documenting the conversation that took place in the last hearing in writing regarding the unsuitability of micro-office for this site and the reasons why, and it provided plenty of backup in terms of articles that showed what prime space is, and it's clear that no matter what they do here, you would not have prime micro-office space.
In an as-of-right.
Right,
Yeah.
well, that's what, yeah, the as-of-right. And it showed the justification for the difference in the number of offices in the as-of-right, depending on where the staircase was located and whether or not it was the double staircase or the single staircase. And they confirmed that the retail comparables that they used had prime ceiling heights of 12 feet or greater, which led me to believe that, okay, they were maximizing the amount of money they could get for the retail at this site.
Regarding the foundations, they had 2 types of foundation systems previously. They removed one, but increased the mat slab from 22 inches to 30 inches, which sort of netted out the cost differential. So the construction costs actually remain the same. But my question would be, the mat slab is a more expensive way to go. The soils indicate, a medium dense sand, and actually the spread footing would be an acceptable method. So I wanted a cost comparison to see if that would be a cheaper alternative.
Is that something that an engineer could appear at the hearing and just discuss with you?
Right, it would be something that, I'd have to look at, but,
Okay.
they could come to the hearing and discuss it, sure.
Right. Because if it's not a significant difference, then, because what we're looking at is whether it goes to the as-of-right project and makes the as-of-right a viable solution, right? So the cost differential would need to...
Well, actually, I still question the double height space. and the size of the ask, in terms of if this is the minimum variance.
The double height space for the retail area.
Right.
But the double height doesn't take floor area.
Right.
Right.
But it does take bulk. I mean, it could be a floor, or it could be,
Then it would add floor area.
right.
So we don't want to add floor area.
I'm just thinking of removing, first of all, they came to us with one FAR request, and they've increased that since they first.
At kind of at our direction, right?
At the
Because we
chair's
were
direction.
at our direction, because they had created inefficient floor plates, and that seemed to be going to the financials, because they had floors that didn't have enough space to rent an office on them. So at our direction, they reconfigured the building. So to push them back and say, now, take away what you added, is confusing at best. Right? So, because from my perspective, I'm also looking at, this needs to be a viable business, right? It's different when we look at a residential layout, you can, people are willing to live in the weirdest things, right? But a business can't really operate if it doesn't have some basics, like a place where you can put your table and your chairs, right? So, and it is, at the moment, a very, it's a small site, and the circulation system takes up a lot of space, so you're
Right.
left with very small offices as is, right? So, okay.
Item number 17, 215 BZ, 1364 East 23rd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. With respect to the threshold question of retention of the existing house, we asked at the last hearing that the floor plans include dashed lines to indicate exterior walls to be removed and hatching to indicate the areas of new construction. We also asked for calculations of the exterior walls to remain at each floor and a percentage of the joists to remain. As far as I could tell, this was not provided, so I'm still not certain we have enough existing structure to say this is an enlargement of an existing building. With respect to improving the rear yard studies that was requested, a site plan was provided. That's still unclear, but appears to reiterate that in the immediate area of the subject, that is adjacent and backing up to it, there are no other houses with a two-story, 20-foot rear yard, or even a 26-foot rear yard. The proposed project was revised somewhat to reduce the depth at the third floor to a 26-foot rear yard, although no change was made to the second floor or the building's height and mass. The applicant provides an alternate that, as far as that is laid out to show that the house won't be big enough if forced to cut back at the rear of the second floor to increase the rear yard depth. There's also an excuse about increased flashing detail costs. Sorry, but I don't buy the argument. I find that the layout of the alternate is very inefficient, and that there's ample space to accomplish the desired room layouts and so on. And an argument about costly flashing, I'm sorry to say that I'm kind of an expert on the subject of flashing. This is an enormous house, and it will be costly to build, and flashing details are actually the least of the owner's cost concerns. I have to say that maybe it's just the graphics. I mean, I know that these are hand drawings, and changing hand drawings is much more difficult in a certain way than changing CAD drawings. So it's clear that the drawings were modified by either erasures or cutting or something like in the old days. But so maybe it's just the graphics, and maybe it's the absence of axonometric or renderings to show us better about the massing of the building, or maybe it's the inadequate graphics for the data studies. But I still see this house as overwhelming the height of the neighbors, impinging on the open space of those adjacent properties that have complying rear yards, and making little effort to modulate the building's mass and deference to neighborhood character. I worry about the board's, not just in this case, but in others, whittling away of this and other neighborhoods' character with these applications. And I can't stop thinking about the testimony provided by a neighbor in connection with another of today's 73622 applications, where Ms. Chiparulo wrote, "The board and community board have been allowing the extensions of many houses in her neighborhood without the least bit care about the surrounding homes. The new homes are taller and wider. They are eyesores. Shame on you," she said. Or Councilmember Reynoso's statement at a city council hearing in December that refers to other BSA actions in Brooklyn, where she said, "The BSA started eating away at the neighborhood's edges and then using the changes that they made as a reference to continue to push the edges back and moving the goalpost further and further back." So I think everybody knows my sentiments about this. I don't think the board should be doing this, and these little lots can't handle the pressure. So I really do think that this house needs to be scaled down, or the graphics have to show me better that the house is not out of scale with the existing character of the neighborhood. Anybody else?
Well, I know the applicant said that the layout was partially dictated by the medical needs of a child. I was just questioning whether the bathroom was ADA accessible. It really didn't look like it to me. I was somewhat convinced about the other homes that have been granted special permits, and they had two-story enlargements in the rear yard. So, not in terms of the height of the building, just in terms of the two-story enlargement, I wasn't that concerned.
But they're not near this house. They're up the street or across in another tax block, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. It's one, in the whittling away, when the board already started whittling away and uses as a reference its own whittling, you know, it's really, for me, it's a shame on me. But to start it again on a new block, I don't see what the motivation is. So. Okay.
Item number 618, 2016-3BZ, 1212 Victory Boulevard, Staten Island.
This one, we do have a comment from the borough president, who still has problems with the project, right?
He's still opposed, according to the verse I got, was he's still opposed, may submit comments, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
It's not like his traces.
Okay, they have, the revised plans have reduced the proposal to 2 pumps from 3, but I still see the maneuverability diagram using the area that's streetward of the widening line for access, as opposed to landward or waterward. According to the borough president, the city will be acquiring that area for street widening, so there can be no dependency on what will eventually be a sidewalk for their own turnaround. The maneuverability for cars on the site, plus the pass-through, is very tight. There's a pass-through lane, is very tight, and it appears that the cars can only accomplish that approach from Seneca and depart at the last cut on Victory. There are still 3 curb cuts on Victory and 1 on Seneca. I think that's a lot of curb cuts for a small site, and I don't see the need. The borough president also expressed concerns about this proposal's impact on the capital project's dedicated turning lane. I'd like more information about that from the borough president, because I don't know what that is, and the applicants need to respond to it. The borough president also references the discontinuance of the conforming use in a residence district, but the site is actually in a commercial district to which these special permits apply, which allow gas stations. So maybe that's the problem, that the special permits apply in these low-density, kind of low-level commercial districts. And again, although it isn't in today's zoning resolution, in the pre-1961 zoning resolution, a gas station at this location wouldn't have been permitted since it's within 300 feet of a public park, both across the street on Seneca and on Victory. I think we should be looking at how pedestrians get to these parks and whether busy curb cuts will be putting them at risk. The borough president asked us to look at this as well. No traffic or pedestrian impact analysis was provided, and in my opinion, it should be. The community board also asked for planting along the Seneca frontage next to the building, and the special permit has screening requirements. Those weren't provided, or some was provided on the drawings, but not all of that. They need to specify the fencing, which should be wrought iron sitting on a 4-foot-high brick wall as long as we're at it, and should wrap on Seneca in front of the building and along the property lines. That's assuming we get past everything else about this issue. They need also to specify the species of evergreen trees that will create the dense 4-foot deep, 4-foot-high buffer, and 4-foot-high immediately buffer. It's planted at 4 feet high, to grow to 6 feet high within 3 years, which should follow that fencing. This is all a requirement of the special permit. No proposal was given for how to treat the back of the building, which is unsightly. And what are the proposed finished materials for the renovated building? Is the operator of the filling station known? Because sometimes we know what their approaches are. And I think that given our discussion at the last hearing about the traffic that may be caused by the proposed convenience store, there are probably not enough parking spaces, and they also need to provide a light spread diagram.
Right.
Next.
I have comment. I'm sorry, our battery's running low. I do have comments. First of all, I agree with you regarding the proximity of this with all the various playgrounds that are located along Seneca and Victory Boulevard. They do need to provide a pedestrian study to indicate the conflict, especially the intersection of Seneca and Victory. The maneuverability plan, as you indicated, shows that there will be more vehicles that will be turning then from Seneca and then exiting onto Victory. Seneca is a residential street, so that means more vehicles will be then coming through a residential street, Seneca, and then making that turn. So that analysis also needs to be further clarified, how this will not, whether this will have any impact on the residential section of this block. And I'm still not convinced how a truck can maneuver from Victory without that widened street bed. So I think there's still some work to be done.
While they reduced the number of pumps, not happy to see that they still want to have diesel fuel sold here. And although they did put a truck circulation plan in, it actually shows the path that the truck would take entering and exiting the site, and the truck isn't even on the path. So I'm not sure that that is actually workable. I really think they need to remove the diesel sales. I think diesels should be located in a more, high-density usage, commercial usage area than this.
I agree with everybody.
Okay. Okay.
Item number 9, may I go on? Item number 19, 2016-4136BZ and 2016-4137BZ, 19-59, 19-61, 1955 through 1957 49th Street, Queens.
They provided a diagram showing 38 parking spaces on stackers on the first floor, with a letter from the architect stating that maneuverability is an issue, but without any support for that statement. There's also a B alternative with 26 spaces that doesn't include any non-stacker spots, where I see at least 32 spaces would work in that version. The proposed plan that has 19 non-stacker spaces is already really crammed in. So if you can cram them in on site, I don't know why you can't figure out ways to cram them in with stackers. There's brilliant parking valet guys who can do all kinds of stuff. And the 19 non-stacker spaces are probably also using the street system in order to pull the cars out and get back in and so on. One of the questions I had was whether this architect, given that Sam Schwartz is doing the analysis, this architect has any parking garage design experience, because normally when you just have Sam Schwartz's company do the parking design. The parking study was revised to consider more carefully local private car utilization, the 2013 East Elmhurst rezoning EAS in combination with census tract reverse journey to work data, which shows 68% auto use, narrowed in on more realistic utilization rates and revealed peak and off-peak parking demands that exceed that required by the zoning resolution, with 143 cars during the highest demand time and a parking shortfall based on the proposed 38-car lot of 107 spaces. On-street parking utilization maps were provided as requested, but the date that the studies were conducted is not shown on them, though the accompanying study indicates it was a Tuesday in October 2 years ago. There is no total tabulation per map on the parking availability for the study period, which I just find so difficult to follow then. And also, because the maps are color-coded, and by the time we get them, I don't know which version PDF color rendition shift there is. It's quite difficult to figure out which shade of yellow and red and blue and green. And so maybe it's because of those shifts, but it really looked like there were many areas with either no parking allowed or limited parking that show having available spaces. So I'm like, well, is that really red and it's looking like purple now? I mean, I actually couldn't correlate the maps.
Yeah, I actually had that same problem when I was looking at it, and I was lining up like no parking from 11:30 to 1 PM, and then I'm looking at the 11 to 12 PM map, and it's showing availability, and so I was thinking, maybe we're talking about availability from 11 to 11:30.
Right,
Just the small part where it still was. I think they need to clarify that, because it's very confusing.
Just to add to that, I think there are no standing signs as indicated in the plan, which is like on Hazen Street and on 47th Street and 19th Avenue. According to the clear red marking, it says no standing or
Right.
handicap bus, and it's showing there's availability of parking spaces of 8 or 3 or 6 respectively.
Right.
I have a lot of concerns with this traffic study.
Yeah.
I'll let you finish and I'll pick up on it.
Yeah, okay, so for me, I couldn't tell at all whether the parking spaces were available on the site. And I was just wondering if there's another way of doing this, because we have seen that as the standard, and I don't know why it gets lost in translation so often. And it's also because there's a list of the parking rules, and it's like on Thursday, this is a Tuesday study, on Thursday, there's no parking over there. So where does the Thursday no parking stuff figure in? And maybe there are fewer spaces in general available on Thursday, and you can't figure that out from these studies because it's only done one day. Like shadow studies take into account all the time periods. Maybe the parking studies should do the same. They should take in the whole week or something, because it's really hard to figure out, like, what about Friday? Maybe Friday has more rules, and then Friday is a much worse parking availability day.
Friday is also when people leave early and.
Well, I'm just throwing out a day. It doesn't matter whether it's Friday or whatever. And also, what the other part of it is, you should be able to see on the map, here's the 10 to 11 hour. That means where there's no spaces available, it should just be black. 0, 0, right? And instead, you have to then check if it's blue, and then if it's Wednesday, and then if it's between 10 and 11, and that kind of thing. It seems like there would be a much clearer way of revealing that data.
Way to go, this is just my thought, and we haven't had much discussions on this, but
Yeah.
if, let's say, there are streets where there are more days designated for no on-street parking for street cleaning purposes, as a conservative estimate, we should eliminate those parking spaces out. But if, let's say, it's once a week, for 2 hours, parking is not permitted, maybe we can let.
Yeah, except those are peak hours sometimes.
Well,
So
again,
then
it
how do you do
varies. So
that?
if it's between 10 to 12, let's say, for example, in this particular case, the peak demand period is between 10 to 11, and the street parking is from 11:30 to 12. Now, nobody's going to come here at 9 o'clock so that they can meet their parking. And besides, the car is going to
Yeah.
be towed. So it's irrelevant whether you come early to find your parking space, which nobody will do. Besides, your car won't be there after you're done with your work. So I think if the peak demand period and the cleaning period is very close, then it should not be analyzed. But if it is, let's say, some places it's in the evening, or.
Well, evening doesn't come short.
I don't know if I agree with that, because I think that we don't know why people are coming to the site and how long their actual period of time that they're going to stay there is. I think we just need to clarify that if it's showing availability from 11 to 12 and alternate side is at 11:30 to 12, that availability is reflecting 11 to 11:30, because people can show up at 11 and be gone by 11:30, so why shouldn't they reflect that? There's no part of this study that is saying the average stay at this destination is 2 hours. So there's no, we don't know that. It could be 5 minutes. You could be running in to ask a quick question and running out. So you should be able to park from 11:15 to 11:30.
Right, well, it's the
So
nature
why
of
would
these
that
sort
be
of
counted
generalized
out?
studies where you're looking at generalized peak hours and generalized parking requirements as opposed to the very specifics of when there's parking versus when there's someone, right? So some of it's going to have to cave to the generalities, but
Right.
I think that this so overgeneralizes it that we actually can't figure out, we can't hone in.
Right, no, they need to clarify it, but I certainly wouldn't remove streets, is what
Yeah,
I'm saying.
right.
From the parking study.
Right.
Based on somebody's assumption that there's no way they're gonna park on that street for 5 minutes, because people do that
Right,
all
don't
the
run in and
time.
get a
Run in,
medication
yeah,
or-
maybe you forgot a prescription, maybe you forgot your hat, you don't know what it is.
Well, and then, so, let me see. So just to continue my comments, the 2013 East Elmhurst rezoning EAS projected only 15 soft sites, and that's the area around this site, with small-scale developments that would provide little to no additional parking, but would provide new commercial, community facility, and residential uses. Parking requirements were reduced also in some of those areas with the rezoning. Parking conditions in the area were not analyzed in depth in the study, so we also don't know what the future impact is of the rezoning and of those commercial and community facility developments. It's of course impossible to know what the real development potential of the rezoning is, but we were not provided with a list of new permits issued since the rezoning, and the future impact of new development is not discussed in the study. The zoning calculation sheet still shows no waivers needed. We asked them to revise that last time, and shows 19 spaces are permitted, and use group 4 is not permitted. So maybe they submitted that one by mistake, they changed it and they submitted the wrong one. The board, though, to cut to the chase, because we're talking about a shortfall of 107 spaces, the board has been consistent when considering these parking waivers of requiring the applicant to meet demand on site or by permanently dedicating an off-site location to meet demand, and thereby allowing, where appropriate, waivers of the balance of the required parking if it exceeds demand. Here, demand exceeds the required parking, so I actually don't see how the section 73-03 findings are met for this waiver of not benefiting the community in a way that's greater than the detriment to the community. You're putting 107 cars, and that could be an underestimate, on the street, and I have to ask why, because it looks like you can handle it with stackers, even if it's hard.
Or with some off-site parking
Or
or
off-site.
some other solution.
Right.
Or even a change of some of the use in the building.
I still have concerns about the on-street parking study that's being done. I think it needs more cleaning up. in terms of the way some of the availability of on-street parking has been accounted for. First of all, this is a very active manufacturing area. On my site visits, I have noticed that I couldn't find any parking. Pretty much every curb cut was occupied, not just on that block, but on on the abutting manufacturing blocks. There are tractor trailers that are parked there, all various manufacturing-related vehicles. So I'm not sure there is parking available, on-street parking. So I think the data needs to be cleaned up a little bit more. The other thing is that some of the blocks that has the residential units, as indicated, I want to make sure that they have accounted for the multiple amount of curb cuts that are located on these block fronts, because these properties have parking in the front yard and there are multiple curb cuts. So I want to make sure that that has been accounted for in determining the available number of parking spaces.
Oh, you think they just did it by the length of the block and not a survey?
I don't know. I don't know the methodology, so I think that needs to be clarified. As I mentioned, like some of the no standing parking spaces just should not be accounted for. They should be removed from the count. Again, I am, while two options with stackers were provided, it was not at all clearly stated why those are not feasible. And I think combination of stackers and at grade can be provided, which can lead to a higher number, close to that 38 spaces, and I would like them to look into that again.
Right.
I agree that the explanation for the infeasibility of the stackers was not convincing to me. I think they definitely have to look at a situation or a solution that has stackers in each of those buildings.
Okay, thank you.
Item number 20, 2016-4208BZ, 142 West 19th Street, Manhattan.
In response to board comments, the proposed project has been modified from 100 feet high to 8 stories and 80 feet high to the roof, 92 foot 6 inches to the top of the bulkhead roof, with 8 dwelling units, but adding waivers to reduce the required rear yard to 19 foot 5 inches and lot coverage to 80.5%. We have new letters now of support for the revised project from Councilmember Johnson and State Senator Hoylman. We also have a new letter of opposition from council, so now we have opposition represented by council, representing a neighbor at 138 West 19th Street. That neighbor states that it didn't receive notice of the initial hearing, but we actually have proof of mailing of the notice dated February 1st, 2017 to owner agent at the address. That's the issue about notice to neighbors. You don't know who to send it to except what public records indicate is the property owner of the sites. This 138 West 19th Street was discussed at length at the last hearing, as it is 2 lots to the east of the subject site and is narrower than the subject. That site had an existing 4-story building that was enlarged to 6 stories and a penthouse without a variance. That's why it was discussed so heavily. The applicant submitted letters from a demolition contractor, which I wonder is he predisposed to assuming demolition? It's sort of like going to a surgeon and asking if you need surgery. And also from a structural engineer, that to justify the demolition of the existing building, they provided no supporting materials, so they're just kind of conclusory statements about the need to demolish that existing building. Additional borings on the cleared site were drilled, finding bedrock at 9 to 11 feet below sidewalk level or 4 to 6 feet below the existing cellar slab. They state that 175 cubic yards of rock needs to be removed for foundations using drilling and splitting techniques. They didn't provide boring logs, and they need to. And, that's the subject of then why do you need this cellar if it's causing you so much trouble? Don't have this, you don't need a deeper cellar, you already have a cellar. So with respect to the uniqueness study, 4 other sites within 400 feet have 2-story structures on tiny lots that are arguably in a worse position than the subject site. One similar site, as discussed at the last hearing, again, that was 138 West 19th, made do by renovating and adding additional floors in compliance with the sliver law. And so I'm wondering, is this site different because of the recently demoed building? Are they saying somehow that the need to demolish it makes them unique? I don't know what the argument is, really. Comments, I just want to make some comments about the plans. I think the plans were, in short, I think the plans were done really, really quickly and submitted really, really quickly because there's places where stuff doesn't connect, like the elevator doesn't go to the cellar. How does the trash then get brought to the street? What's the means of access or egress from the cellar utilities area? What is the second means of egress from the cellar apartment? Is it through the back, through the apartment, which isn't allowed? Cellar sleeping is prohibited in the multiple dwelling law, so how does that work? How does it comply? And again, I don't think the drawings are complete, since the first floor shows 4 staircases going down to the cellar, but the cellar doesn't show any staircases, or shows 1. The private stair bulkhead, I think, is unnecessarily large. The elevation shows the windows extending higher than the roof line, which is an interesting trick. The finished material of the entire building, I'd like to know that. Is it stucco? I noticed that the elevations and the renderings actually don't match, so I'm not sure what the finish is and the floor-to-floor or top of parapet heights are. I think the renderings are probably obviously more studied than what they plan to do, but the elevations don't look like that. The Oasis data footprint that was provided is not very informative, and we were not provided with information about the depth of the adjacent lots' rear yards relative to the proposed rear yard reduction, or the heights of those adjacent buildings at the rear yards. The financials were revised to comport with the new proposed 8-story building, but I'll let Commissioner Otley Brown discuss that. And I'd like to know, is the rear yard coverage reduction plus the sliver law waiver the minimum necessary? Minimum variance necessary? Would a 7-story building with rear yard coverage reduction or an 8-story without a rear yard coverage reduction be sufficient? The board has granted, I note, very few rear yard reductions such as this one. Although I have to say that this lot is only 92 feet deep, so you might say, okay, maybe an 8-foot reduction is where you should go. And so, next.
So starting with the reduction of the rear yard, it wasn't quite made clear in the narrative as to why that was necessary and how it was arrived. I gather it would be for marketing purposes, but it just was not clearly stated. It would be helpful if the applicant can walk us through that argument as to why that is necessary as an alternative to eliminating the additional floor and a penthouse unit. I think that would be helpful. Just a couple of cleaning up in terms of the financing shows that the 50,000 that was initially assumed for site cleanup, phase 2 will not be required and was eliminated from the calculation. However, the statement of facts still refers to it.
Say that again, that the 50K what?
So I think in the initial submission, there was a 50,000 that was set aside for phase 2 work.
That was a placeholder.
As a placeholder. It was eliminated from the financing, but the statement of facts still refers to it. So I just want to make sure all the documents are saying the same thing. I think I'll let Commissioner Otley Brown say that because this relates to the financing, so she may pick it up, and if not, I'll have to.
Okay.
I still have issues with the D-finding on this. I'm still not convinced that this isn't self-created. And it's, while they did do an as-of-right where they took out all of the hardships that had to do with the high water table and the rock, I'm wondering whether or not they could have done something that was on the original floor plate of the partial cellar and just have a partial cellar there that you would put your mechanicals in and just have a simplex apartment on the ground floor and see where that would lead in terms of making this feasible. As for my actual individual financial comments that I had made originally, I felt that they did address the things that I was concerned about, which had to do with the comparables for the residential apartments. You know, I originally said there were too few comparables and they were old, and what they ended up doing this time is they actually provided an awful lot of comparables of different types. So they have comps that are recent, then they have comps that are large 2 bedrooms, then they have comps that are located on low floors, then they have comps that are located in narrow loft buildings. And so all of those comparables seem to indicate lower sales prices than I actually thought would be here. And then they also talked about how they did the add-on for the outdoor space. They cited the Miller Samuel article, and they actually used the 50% of internal space for outdoor space pricing. And then they described how they went about pricing the outdoor space for the ground floor duplex and how they went about pricing the outdoor space for the topmost unit. So I actually found that was really a good explanation, and I think they supported their points very well. As for the stacking plans that they showed us, I still have questions about how in which they arrange their price per square foot per apartment based on location. So for instance, they have in the as-of-right residential stacking plan an average of $1,959 a square foot with a low of $1,712 a square foot for that garden apartment and a high of $2,400. In the proposed, they have an average of $2,036 a square foot, which made sense because you have 2 higher floors, with a low of $1,654 a square foot and a high of $2,697 a square foot. The question I have is, if that ground floor apartment is exactly the same in both scenarios, then why do you have so much lower price per square foot for that ground floor apartment in the proposed? And so I think they just need to address the way in which they went about pricing. And they said they went to an external company that actually does pricing, so maybe they have somebody who could come speak about that. They added that new scenario that had no extra premium costs, and it's still showing a negative. And so, you know, I think personally, since I feel this is self-created, I actually would go right to the as-of-right, no hardship, and look at that as my baseline and not look at their as-of-right, because I'm not accepting those costs as being true costs of hardship.
Okay.
I agree with you. I think the proposed plans were done very quickly, and I actually think the floor size of the floor plates is incorrectly calculated. They added about 240 square feet for reducing the rear yard, yet, and their floor plate should now be like, the typical floor plate, like the second floor and above, should be around 1,787 gross square feet, and that's not what's represented on the plans. Also, the difference between the as-of-right and the proposed sellable unit area is only about 100 square feet, yet they've added 240 gross square feet with the rear floor reduction.
You mean the proposed between the first iteration and the second iteration? Or do you mean the
The
as-of-right
as-of-right now,
versus the proposed?
right, because the as-of-right has a 30-foot rear yard, and the proposed has a 19-and-a-half-foot rear yard.
Right, because the financials are accounting for 100 square feet more of net residential area for all of those apartments in the proposed.
Right, but the net increase in gross square footage on the typical floor was 240 square feet. So what happened to,
I'm sure they probably expanded the elevator staircase lobby.
but why would you do that?
Why would you expand it?
Right.
Yeah.
I
As
don't
it
know,
is
they
now.
should
wanted for
address
bedrooms.
it, but
They
I'm
wanted for
sure.
bedrooms.
Well, you
that
really
was,
can't use it for bedrooms.
Well, you make them
because you-
longer.
Right, but
Or more-
well, what they did do is instead of making them longer, is they added the home office in.
Right,
That's what they did.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a very deep floor plate.
yes.
But I believe
So
there
now
could
we're
be
gonna
an
make
error
it.
in the plans themselves, which was carried over to the financials, but was not reflected. McQuilkin had the correct numbers in the cost estimate. So it's not like a net change, you know.
He has the numbers that were given to him, right? He does
Right,
on-
he looked at the plans and he did his own calculations
usually
in
does his
terms
own
of
tables,
square
yeah.
footage and lengths and perimeter, you know,
Right.
area, and those seem to all be correct.
Okay, but so then
For gross square footage, you're saying?
Right, just for the cost to build this building.
construction costs seem to be correct,
Correct.
but maybe then it doesn't play out in the financial, in the value of the units because they're undersized, is
Yes.
what you're saying,
Right,
possibly.
Right,
So it's to
possibly.
check that the gross areas of the units are accurate.
right.
No,
Yeah.
you
Well,
want
the
the net
sellable-
residential.
sellable
She wants
area.
the
Sell-
net-
that's what I mean, the
Yeah.
sell-
Right,
the
they're
sellable
showing it
area.
as like 1336, and I really think it should be closer to 1500.
Okay, that's a big difference, okay.
The question I had, and maybe Commissioner Otley Brown, you can weigh in on it. When I was reviewing the sales comp that was submitted in 2016 and the recent one, I noticed that the size and configuration adjustment factors still remain the same, given that especially for the two-bedroom units on floors 2 to 7, they now have bigger floor plate, there's an additional home office.
Right, but did you see the whole listing of comps? There's like
Yeah.
10 pages of comps. So it's like what they did was they just sliced and diced all of the comps in different ways to show that it wasn't having that big an impact on the price that they originally assumed for it. Because what they did use is they used large two bedrooms, and then they used large two bedrooms in loft buildings, and nothing really budged that price per square foot upwards in any significant way.
All right, thank you.
Nope. Item number 21, 2016-4249 BC, 2420 Amsterdam Avenue, Manhattan.
Rolling. Wow. Okay. We received a very detailed explanation from a law firm on how the Brownfield Redevelopment Tax Credit Program works, the basics of how credit amounts are determined, and the fact that the credits cannot be syndicated the way they can be with low-income housing tax credits, which I actually didn't know, so I found that was very interesting. Although the credits can, as you would imagine, be distributed through ownership partnership or used directly by the partnership. The environmental consultant also discussed how the future value of the tax credit should be viewed in terms of discounts in case you have to take it off your taxes. And, I mean, consider it as income. No estimate was given in the explanations, though, for the amount of credits these developers should expect to receive. And I would be interested to hear from these experts how it was how they've worked on other projects, like how it has worked on other projects that they've handled, as opposed to the statistical analyses that they provided from the public databases. So in other words, I worked on a project and this was how much it cost, and this finally, in the end, 3 years later or whatever, was the amount of the credit that people were able to take and so on. So we have some real empirical, or let's say anecdotal information. The cleanup costs for the many alternatives were refined and corrected. We found some mistakes on the last one. They provided drawings of a reduced height and wider tower top. As demonstrated, the proposal increases the number of required waivers. The wider tower top and the reduced height increases the number of waivers and doesn't actually improve the relationship of the proposed building height to the neighbors. I'm not going to speak yet because of the financials have to drive how much floor area, but in fact, the proposed height to the roof of the tower is actually 266 feet, and sitting on top of that and set back 86 feet from the east lot line is a 3-story glass block, that box that contains the restaurant and 2 stories of mechanical bulkheads. So the roof height of the restaurant is 280 feet, so it's effectively stepping up from the tower to the north, which is 236 feet to the roof, and the towers to the south at 290 feet. Make an argument that this is sort of the building that mitigates between, or let's say negotiates in terms of height between a slightly lower tower here and the taller towers that are right there in terms of the urbanism. I would like an explanation, though, about the size of the mechanical floor plates and the reason the elevator overrun is higher than 2 bulkhead levels if the elevators don't stop at those levels. And then in terms of the floor area, well, we can talk about that after Commissioner Otley Brown speaks to the financials. We do have DOT sign-off now. DEP signed off on noise, and the hazmats are okay because that's handled through the brownfield anyway. And the revised EAS was actually submitted on Friday, right? Anybody, the next?
I think the alternate proposal or the revised proposal that was submitted, I agree with you. I think from a neighborhood character, it is not really making a marked difference. I think the proposal as originally submitted, I think is more responsive, and the bid form is also it's more attractive and does make a statement in this neighborhood and does not ask for an additional waiver. So I think that this proposed alternative, the proposal as originally submitted is sufficient for me. I think they have responded. I let Commissioner Otley Brown respond to the financing, but in terms of all the documentations that they're providing, it has responded to my concerns, and it's been very thorough, especially with all the financial analysis, the last one that was submitted with regards to how the community facility, the per square foot was analyzed, the commercial, the retail. I think those were very informative and helpful. So I'm fine with the project as it stands.
Okay. So I have a lot of commentary here, so I'm probably going to jump around and read as much as I can so that it could be clear. First, I want to say that I felt that the financials did a lot in documenting what was actually said in the hearing, and so I appreciate that, and there was a lot of work that was done with them. However, I still have some issues that could be major issues. We'll have to see how we get answers. First of all, for the community facility, they did a good job of furthering the analysis by getting community facility comparables from more valuable sites in Midtown Manhattan, and then heavily adjusting them for location, which they said that they would do, and I actually agreed that that would be a good idea. This plays out as the as-of-right having $55 a square foot, which is being used as the average, because it's the average of the lower, cheaper floors at $50 a square foot, and the smaller, more high-valued upper floors. Makes sense, but they don't give me the rent for the upper floors, so I don't really know how that plays out when you then move to the lesser variance. The lesser variance with the high floors as community facility, they say they're going to use $55 a square foot, which they say is the same as the high floors in the as-of-right. But if you look at the as-of-right, it can't be the high floors of the as-of-right, because the as-of-right average uses $55 because they're using $50 on the low floors and an untold higher number on the upper floors to end up with an average of $55. So that's a problem. The lesser variance, low floors are $50 a square foot, in line with the as-of-right, so that makes sense. There's a similar issue with the commercial office space. Now, they used 9 office properties above 125th Street in Manhattan that they felt were comparable in terms of condition, and they adjusted those for location, and I was actually fine with that. They use $55 a square foot as the low end of the office pricing in all schemes, and $70 a square foot as the high end of the office pricing. So the blended average is $60 for the proposed. For the lesser variance, they use $55 a square foot as the blended average because they argue that you don't have those higher valued upper floors as office. That makes sense. In the lesser variance where the lower space is medical, they use $60 a square foot because the highest floors are office and the lower floors are community facility. This should be higher though, since it doesn't have the lower office floors to drag the average down like the proposed does. So it's a similar kind of situation where I think they just need to do a little adjusting by a few dollars a square foot. But as you see later when I conclude, that can make very big differences in terms of value. I thought they did a great analysis of the retail space and how they arrived at the pricing for the retail scheme, because they basically took, they wanted to show me that there was more of an effect on retail pricing by location rather than condition of space and whether or not it was old or new. And I thought they did a very good job of showing beautiful, nice, new spaces that are located in areas that don't have commercial strip versus old spaces that are located in areas where they are on a commercial strip. And showing that even if they're adjusting for location, they're still coming out lower than the actual amount that they assumed for this scenario. So I accepted it. Their hotel analysis, to me, still has issues that remain. The initial year actually sets the baseline, and it's 2018. And it barely exceeds the first STR report that had hotels of questionable comparability. That's the first report where I said you have a lot of economy hotels, like Days Inn and things like that, that I didn't think was comparable. The initial 2018 year is based on the 2015 year average for average daily rate and occupancy. That's old information. And being that they did revise the report, I would love to see what's going on with 2016. We don't have the complete information for the 2016 year. All we have is the first few months, which are always the lowest months of every year in terms of average daily rate and occupancy. And as a result, we don't really know if there was any further growth in these two indicators that they're not capturing by only using 2015 as the base to assume 2018 assumptions. And not only that, but there's hardly a difference in average daily rate between the as of right and the proposed. There's only $6 in difference per night. And the proposed to me offers more amenities, so I'm not convinced that you're going to change the pricing by a mere $6. The parking stayed the same, and there's no change since last report. However, they did put the wrong Schedule F narrative into this report that actually reflects that they were still adjusting down for competition, but they're no longer doing that. So they just need to pull that and add the right narrative in place. The property taxes. The property taxes are currently $104,000 annually. However, taxes for the length of construction period and rent-up period seem much higher, and they're also different in each scenario. The taxes actually should stay at the current land amount for 3 years of construction period due to Department of Finance's practice of actually reducing the tax amount due to what they call a progress exemption, which is basically saying you built the building, but you haven't finished building it, so you can't use it, so you shouldn't pay taxes on it. So they always roll back that value that is attributed to the building. And so because of that, there's no need for these property taxes to have jumped up so high, and also to be different in every scenario. So what they need to do is give a rationale for the taxes assumed in all scenarios, or just adjust all the scenarios down to the land value, the tax value due to the land, multiplied by the amount of years for construction or the amount of years in the rent-up period. So in conclusion, to me, there's one major issue here. And the issue is that the YWA letter makes it very clear that they will outperform any market by as little as 20% over current asking rents and prices to as much as 50%. That being said, the projects they cite are still in established neighborhoods where they are simply creating a project directed at the most affluent clientele. This project is different and perhaps a little more speculative since they are going into an area that is not yet gentrified, and they're trying to create a market for the high-end user while not exactly sure what the financial capacity that user actually has. They may exceed their income projections right off the bat, or it may take some time, or they may not. That's still a question mark. However, it's still of vital importance that they get their income assumptions as close to accurate as possible. They seem to be doing that, but I still have those questions that I stated just prior to this statement. While it may seem like they're minor quibbles over a few dollars a square foot, adjusting the asking rents by a mere $3 a square foot could lead to $250,000 worth of net operating income added to the equation. If multiple asking rent types each budge upwards by a few dollars, that could actually make the as-of-right or the lesser variances or the proposed more feasible or feasible. For example, adding $600,000 to net operating income makes all of the scenarios feasible using the cap rates that they stated. And simply correcting the office income asking rent, which I mentioned in the beginning, of lesser variance 2 to $63 a square foot instead of the $60 a square foot actually adds $300,000 to income. If you also adjusted the hotel income upwards, well, there you would have that difference in income that I'm talking about. So when you think back at what YWA says about exceeding market expectations, that's where you see that my dilemma is a little clearer.
Understood. Interesting. Thank you.
Just regarding the financials, I'm not a financial analyst, but I looked at the proposal, and then I looked at the lesser variance too, with just a few floors of community facility in the base, and I saw that the construction costs were $6 million difference. And that seemed rather large to me, just converting 18,000 square feet from office to community facility. If they could explain that, it seemed rather high. As far as the Langen memo, I was able to follow all the costs for the soils and the rock, you know, through the different volumes. I did have one question regarding the excavation of the setback area. If they could just give me a drawing or something providing the dimensions exactly of what the area is. And it appears that everything in the setback area is historic fill. And I just wanted some clarification of, is that really required to be removed and refilled under the Brownfield Credits Program? And it's sort of like, well, if you're excavating this area, why don't you just create a cellar space? If you're required to, and, you know, because since it's historic fill, I generally don't think we require removal of historic fill.
So I have a question about the rents. So, when you're doing this analysis, are you projecting for the future rents? Because the actual build year isn't for 2 years? Or are you basing it on today's comps?
No, they're just basing it on today's comps. The only time where they're really projecting is in terms of hotel income.
Right.
And I believe they're doing that because they're making the justification that in the opening year, you're going to have a situation where you have lower occupancy rates and probably lower rates as a hotel tries to establish itself.
Right. So I guess my question has, in terms of the office rents, is having looked for office space recently in this neighborhood, we looked in really A-grade buildings, and the rents are in the low 50s in Wall Street, Wall Street neighborhood. And as you go higher up in the building, like into the 20-something floor, then they go up into the 60s. So, but it seems that, this is the heart of downtown, in the center of a hub of every form of transportation. And it seems to me that those numbers of $55 and $60 a square foot seem high or or surprising anyway, because I also, but on the other hand, I look at downtown Brooklyn, the sort of Metro Tech area, also in the mid-50s and high 60s when you get up, or let's say 60s when you get up higher. So, but this area is not a transportation hub, the subject area is not a transportation hub, so it would seem to me like how
Well,
is
it's
it that
not a central business area,
Right, it's not central
but it
business?
is a transportation hub of
Oh,
sorts.
because of the bus terminal.
Yeah, you
yeah.
have the bus terminal, but you have trains.
You have
as well.
subways.
Right, and you also have local buses that go across the
Right.
Bronx as well. So you are in a transit hub area. You may not be in a central business district in terms of central office district.
Pricing significantly, or?
It's hard to tell because what's built into their price assumptions is the determination to lead the market here. And
Yeah.
that's what I was talking about in my conclusion. It's a speculation that they're building into their prices. And so the question is, will they meet their expectations, exceed them, or fall short?
Right.
You really don't know. And so that's why I'm not so much taking issue with the dollar amount that they settled on. It's more taking an issue with the ranges and the averages so that they make sense in each scenario. So that's what I was very clear
I
about.
see, okay. Thank you. Okay.
Go. Item number 22, 2016-4336BZ, 643 East Tremont Avenue at the Bronx.
Okay, they provided as requested acoustical attenuation details, and as vibration is a big issue with the treadmills and the bikes, I think the applicant should consult with an acoustical engineer to ensure that the proposed methods are adequate, and if another method is recommended, then that method should be implemented. The reason that I'm saying that is that these details are different than what we normally see. I don't see isolators between the studs hitting the ceiling. I just see them hitting the ceiling. So there's, yeah, go ahead.
Well, this is the one where they're actually building a building on top,
Yeah.
and the floor is not going to hit the ceiling. It's going to be a 3-inch air
Oh,
gap, so
right.
it's actually structurally isolated. But when I looked at the plans, they said they were going to put in 6 mils of rubber flooring, which had an STC rating of 45. And then when you look at the detail says they're going to have 25 mils of rubber with an STC rating of 45. So it's a contradiction.
So, okay.
So if they could decide what it is.
Right, okay. But I thought that even though there's the building on top, once you transfer the vibration to any surface, floor, wall, ceiling, then you transfer the vibration in the tenants underneath or next door or whatever.
Well, it'll be going to the walls and the columns.
Yeah, but that's because all the other ones we see, they have these isolators, these springs and other kinds of things
Right.
that separate, and they didn't do this here.
No.
So what I couldn't tell was whether this architect is familiar with this kind of isolation method, and if not, whether they should just be consulting with an acoustical engineer. Because this isn't one that's particularly known for its noisy imposition on people, perhaps we could make that a condition, as opposed to have them come back with an acoustical engineer. Okay.
New cases, item number 1, 2016-4167BZ, 4180 Ocean Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, the community board recommended denial of this application, citing 7 letters of objection and concerns that this will become a multiple dwelling. I reviewed a PDF of the community board's recommendation, and this community board uses this kind of scrolling apparatus, so I couldn't read their recommendation. The scroll gets lost in the PDF. You can't, it's not an active PDF. We do have 1 letter in support and 1 of objection from an immediate neighbor to the rear, objecting to the rear yard extension as impacting her light and air and lot coverage as causing flood hazards and snow hazards. And although we have the 2 letters from neighbors, I see no proof of notice to neighbors, which is required, so that needs to be submitted. There was something submitted this morning, but I'm not sure which one that was. There was a proof of notice to neighbors, but I'm not sure which project that was. With respect to the determination of substantial improvement, we always forward these applications to the DOB's flood hazard administrator, so we should do that. They calculated that it's pretty far away from being 50% of the value of the building, but that's kind of not our domain.
And they should check their math.
And they should, and check
Because
their math,
their
'cause there's
math
some
is
mistakes.
off, yeah.
Math is
Okay. Okay. Also, the survey uses decimals, and the statement of facts and the plans are using feet and inches, and 5.5 feet is not the same as 5 foot 5 inches, so they need to correct the drawings and statement of fact to reflect the same number, even if one's in inches and one's in decimal. The proposed lot coverage is at the higher end of what we see on the rest of the social block in terms of the studies that they provided. The requested FAR is higher than anything seen on the social block, but is similar to 3 other houses on the tax block, one of which is diagonally behind the subject. The requested FAR is somewhat higher than what we see on the social block, but is also similar to the 3 other houses on the tax block. With respect to the rear yards, this is a proposed reduction to 27 foot 11 inches, so it's effectively 2 feet less than allowable, and so, one of the most modest of all rear yard reductions that we see. I presume also it's a legalization of the existing extension at the first floor, which they didn't mention, but would effectively end up being that. According to the figured ground study that they provided, the house to the immediate rear facing Exeter Street, which I believe is the home of the person who sent in the opposition letter, which is 161 Exeter, has only an 18-foot rear yard to the property line, plus a 7-foot easement, so it's effectively a 25-foot deep yard, and appears to be 2-story and an attic. All the other immediately adjacent rear yards are complying. However, there are several other substandard rear yards 2 to 5 houses away from the subject. So this is a block that's been broken down in terms of the depths of the rear yards. Of course, we don't know whether any of these are legal non-complying. There was a new study provided called aerial building heights that one of which simply extrudes the floor plates to the maximum roof peak height. I didn't find that to be a very helpful study because it doesn't take into account the modulation of a building where you've got ridges and setbacks and so on. So to the extent it takes time to do it, I don't think that should be a pursued study. However, I did think that the close-up aerial view was really informative, because it actually tells you what the heights of the setbacks are and so on in the neighborhood. The streetscape photo montage, which I think of as sort of an unfortunate outcome these days, really doesn't do justice to the proposal, since it doesn't take into account the flattening of the perspective that the photos have, when it simply sticks the 2D elevation drawing onto it and makes it like loom over all of the other houses. I mean, I don't understand why anyone thinks that this is a good thing to show us. I wish the consultants, and now I'm really speaking to the consultants who are the ones producing all this stuff, I wish they would learn how to use simple 3D drafting techniques. They're very simple. To insert buildings into context photos or hand sketch the proposals onto the streetscapes. That way we really will understand the context. We won't be having to try to imagine it in our heads, and we won't be using those 2D paste-on streetscape things that are really, they're worse than useless. They tell a negative story, which may not be fair. Compared to most applications we see, though, this is a fairly modest proposal. With respect to the first floor, there is only a little bit of infill at the front. The second floor then fills out to copy the floor plate of the floor below with a small bit of additional infill at the rear, retaining all of the existing yard dimensions. The attic level pulls almost 15 feet back from the rear wall line, so is very respectful of the rear and adjacent neighbors. I don't know if that was in response to community concerns. And as I mentioned earlier, the city council has asked us to respond to community concerns specifically, which this board actually does regularly. But in this case, I don't see articulated by the community why they recommend a denial of this application when the same community board so often recommends approval of other much more aggressive additions, nor any indication that this building will be used for multifamily purposes. It looks like a house. It's a house. So,
Well, they said the community board received 7 letters talking about how it's going to be a multiple dwelling. And apparently there was a complaint filed on Biz that it was a multiple dwelling, and the buildings department went and inspected and said it's not.
okay.
That there were 5 members of one household living there. So and it was dismissed. So I think it's just bad information, perhaps.
Perhaps.
And the plan definitely does not reflect in any which way it can become even multiple dwelling.
Right.
So.
Yeah, there's not
I
like
think it's
multiple
lack-
stairs or multiple
Right.
kitchens or nothing.
Yeah.
Lack of information. I agree with you, this is a modest ask and has been respectful of its neighbors in terms of the way it has set back, especially in the rear. In light of the abutting buildings that have encroached in the rear, this is try to keep it to the minimum, and I think it's a reasonable ask. I just had a question, is the seller, will the seller have to meet the Appendix G requirement? And the reason I'm asking the question.
Only if it was a substantial improvement.
If it's, okay, because there's mechanical space in the cellar, and just as a recommendation, maybe if it turns out to be not a substantial and they don't need to, figure out a way to waterproof that mechanical space.
Well, there would require, if it's not a substantial improvement, yeah, well, that would be well
Just to-
advised, but
Yeah. That's
it's
it.
not required if it's not a substantial
right.
improvement.
It's
Right.
the difference between a cellar and below-grade space.
Right.
Either way, you can have a cellar, it's just you would have to fill in the below-grade space if you had to comply with Appendix G, which is required if it's a substantial improvement.
Right.
But the mechanical.
So they would have to take the mechanicals out.
They would have
Or
to
make 'em-
lift them above the flood-resistant
Yeah.
construction elevation.
But if they don't have to,
Then they can leave them there, and when they get a
Flooded.
hurricane, they'll replace them.
Yeah.
just something for them to keep in mind.
Or build some kind of bathtub thing of their own device, I guess,
Yeah.
down there. Yeah.
So I just wanted to further say, as for the financial justification that they use, they just have to pay attention to the AV to the building and divide that by the assessment ratio, which is 6%. I think that's where their error might be, so they're coming up with a lower building value. It's actually should be $806,000 and not $679,000. And also, they should document where they're getting their cost factors of $50 a square foot for the alteration space and $130 for the actual new
Right.
construction space. And that'll help DOB as well.
Right. 50 seemed low, but
So does 130.
yeah. It's like, who's your contractor?
Exactly.
I would like them to just clarify that the existing first floor elevation is the same existing and proposed, and that it's above the flood-resistant construction elevation. I think they should confirm that all the existing construction below the FRCE is water-resistant construction material. I guess they don't have to provide Sanborns to show the existing non-complying rear yard.
Because we're legalizing it.
We're legalizing it, right. I think they should clarify the height of the raised planter, because that's their visual mitigation measure at the front of the building, but it has to comply with the Section 64 regulations, so if they could show what that is. And then they gave us a certificate of incorporation information. Why did they give that to us?
They said it was in response to some kind of community concern. I don't know what that is.
Is it because of the multiple dwelling issue that was raised? Is it?
I don't know, people are allowed to buy houses using LLCs or whatever. I don't.
Just didn't seem
I
necessary.
mean, the plans actually refer to a property owner and, so.
Call the next one.
Uh-huh.
Item number 2, 2016-4243BZ, 151 East Tremont Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay. We do have proper proof of notice to neighbors for this hearing, and the community board recommended approval on condition, which was, what was their condition? There will be no loading zone or reduction in parking in front of the supermarket. There will be no unloading of delivery trucks during peak hours. All deliveries will be unloaded during the evening and early morning hours, and the supermarket will be handicapped and senior citizen friendly, however they do that. The site actually has a very strange history and deed restriction. We did reach out to HPD to understand it better, especially in light of the need for a variance to comply with the deed's terms. It's crazy that this should have happened. Thank you. So they should provide the chain of title as proof that the sponsor described in the 2014 deed is still the property owner, as it was at the time of the initial submission of the application in 2016. There may not be a subsequent deed, but they need to show that that's the chain. With respect to the abandonment of the use, I'd like to know if an argument was made to DOB that New York City was in control of the site until 2014 and assumed in the disposition that such use would continue, so perhaps the use was not abandoned. I mean, it seems so strange. City takes control, has control of the use, and then hands it to you with an instruction to use it that way, and then DOB turns around, agency next door to other agency, and says, sorry, abandoned. But, so, just seems beyond unfair. With respect to the A finding, it's evident that the history of the building's presence and use on the site is unique, in addition to the site's configuration. Although it's unclear whether the disposition agreement would allow residential use in the building, extensive construction would be needed to bring the commercial building up to code for residential use. I would note that the as-of-right proposal for residential use as a series of maisonettes duplexes to reduce the need for corridors and elevators is very convincing. So I think the question of viable alternate uses was carefully explored. I'd say that because sometimes we see these like wacky versions of an as-of-right, and then you say, oh, come on, you know, it's not serious. But this is actually quite an interesting idea if it didn't cost a fortune to do it and maybe even isn't permitted under the regulatory agreement, or rather the deed. And clearly the use, which is consistent with the building's historical use since the 1930s, is compatible with neighborhood character. The C's of O from the 1960s indicate that the ground floor was use group 6 stores and the second floor use group 6 offices, which is identical to the proposed. I'm wondering if there are traffic or parking concerns associated with the site. The nearest commercial overlay to the site is a C14 that requires 1 per 1,000 square feet for food stores greater than 2,000 square feet, yielding 7 spaces if we applied that, which would have been waived under 36-232 anyway. So even if there was a parking requirement for this, it would be waived. The applicant also should discuss how goods will be unloaded, which was something the community board was concerned about, and how best to avoid nuisance to adjacent residential neighbors. The community board, like I said, was concerned about the impact of loading. And also, I don't really understand why they're applying for specifically a supermarket. Why isn't it just use group 6A? As opposed, why say supermarket? What if you want to do a drugstore in the future or something like that? I don't know why they're so limiting themselves. Go ahead.
This is one project that I was familiar with in my days at HPD. And as you know, HPD doesn't give up viable housing sites easily. This is one where I know HPD went through a lot of various layouts and configurations to see how, if at all, an as-of-right development could be built. And I think we realized that it would not be financially feasible, especially affordable housing, given the irregular configuration. So the best next thing was to dispose it through this asset sales to generate revenue for the city. That's how the site was disposed. And
But why restrict the use? That's the part I don't get.
I think this was to minimize the fact that it will not get abused, so that maybe the supermarket had, when the RFQ was issued, and this is the part I also do not remember because I wasn't fully involved in the vetting of the RFO, but when a proposal is submitted, they do have to indicate what kind of use it would be used for. So maybe in this case, they had specifically said the use, and when the disposition was approved, at that time, that may have been spelled out in the proposal as to justifying why this was viable.
Why wouldn't they have just said any allowable use?
I agree with you. Why not allow for the flexibility, but
And then just put a limit on the bulk.
Or why limit the bulk? I thought the whole reason for disposition is because you've determined it's the neighborhood that's a little bit blighted.
it's again,
That's
the
what they
price
said.
that was set was based on the use that they were proposing, so I think they wanted to make sure, maybe if there was another use that would generate more money, I really don't know the legal argument as to why, but there is a specific element that gets set in because you want to at the time be able to justify that this was assessed value and based on the use that would be proposed, so we want to limit
Any
otherwise.
allowable use, reasonable worst case scenario of an allowable use kind of thing.
And you
Right,
could
and I get
maybe even get more money if you did it
Yeah,
that way.
I'm gonna build
Right?
condos there, maybe
You're
they're not
right.
gonna be affordable.
And that's why it's limited to 20 years, so that if in the market does change 20 years from now, then they can do what they want to. I think for the time being, it was
Seems like
foreseen.
it holds it in this stasis, which they were saying they were trying to avoid by selling it. Anyway, never mind, we don't have to, it's just
think these are
totally
things that-
confusing. But you have comments about the project itself?
No, I don't. I think it's a good use of that site. It's given its location and the two-story building. It's not an attractive location for housing with such an active thoroughfare around it. So I think a commercial use is viable. It has a pretty decent amount of pedestrian traffic, so which makes the site viable for a commercial use, and I think it would add to that corner with some of the other institutional and public spaces that are around it.
I actually, don't have any major problems with this project at all. I just have a few small questions about the financials that if they can address it in person, that would actually be helpful. One of them has to do with the site value. It's based on, all the comps are underbuilt one-story buildings that are either on residential land or commercial overlay with residential, commercial, mixed-use zoning. When it is on mixed-use zoning land, those comps are actually adjusted downward for the lack of variability in use on this site, which is actually good. However, I just wonder why the sites were not also adjusted downward for size and configuration, because even though they're underbuilt like the comparables do have development potential because they can always build to their max zoning,
Right.
FAR, whereas this site does not. So I'm just wondering whether or not it wants an additional adjustment downward, and they can address, their views on that tomorrow. I actually found the exercise of the residential, plans very helpful because it showed that this is a very deep building which has no legal light and air on the rear side. Should I talk or not talk? Keep talking. Actually would make those apartments just dark, dim, deep, and just, unattractive. So I really was convinced just by that. And they also made a reference to the fact that there's a ceiling as to what one can charge as rent in this area, which is limited by the family income in this area, which I fully agree. But follow that up with some documentation about your census tract income. That would just be helpful, just to finish that off. The community facility rent at $27 a square foot. All the comparables are larger. And since the proposed spaces are actually subdivided into smaller spaces under 1,500 square feet a space, should there be an upward adjustment for size for all of those comparables? Since, as they said, there's an economy of size, large spaces rent for lower amounts per square foot, smaller spaces, larger amounts. And in the income and expense portion of the analysis, why are the maintenance and operating expenses, number one, so high a percentage of income? And number two, why is it all the same dollar amount for every scenario regardless of the use type or the income amount? All scenarios show $70,508 or $5.25 a square foot, the maintenance and operating costs, whether it's an apartment building or a community facility or stores and offices.
I had no comments except how they're going to handle the unloading and loading, delivery of materials and trash. So as not to bother the adjacent residential tenants.
Item number 3, 2016-4464BZ, 1350 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
We do have proof of service of the application to the officials, but unless that was submitted this morning, because I'm not sure which one was, we have no proof of notice of hearing to neighbors. Also, although we do have letters from neighbors, so they must have been notified, so I just submit the proof. The community board recommended approval. We have 3 letters in support and 1 very strong letter in opposition, to which I referred at an earlier hearing. And that is in opposition to these special permits in general for the impacts that they've been having on the neighborhood. And as the city council wishes that we respond specifically to community concerns, I note that for some time we have been taking a very close look through empirical study of existing neighborhood conditions to determine whether the proposal will alter the essential character of the neighborhood. Those studies take time and effort for the applicants to prepare and for the board to review. The semi-detached houses, which is what this is, semi-detached houses in general present real challenges with respect to these special permits, since with this building typology, each semi-detached house on either side of the party wall is effectively a single building with a common roof system, and you can't consider one without considering how it impacts its attached neighbor. The drawings need to show the attached neighbor and any affectations that it may have, that the attached neighbor may have, to distinguish it from the subject. I don't think it has any. I think it's actually a twin. We have talked about this approach before with this particular architect. You can't look at this side of the building in isolation. This is a semi-detached building in an R2 zoning district, so it's a non-conforming typology, but common on this social block. No special side yard regulations apply to this type, which it does in some other districts. At the very least, though, the side yard has to comply with paragraph C of section 23-461 for minimum distances between adjacent buildings. The survey shows the distance between the property line and the adjacent building is 4 feet, and paragraph C requires a combined total of 13 feet between buildings. So I don't believe you can reduce the subject side yard to less than 9 feet, or at the very least, you can't reduce it below the existing 8-foot 9-inch condition. The west elevation shows how incongruous the addition is to the attached typology, as does the front elevation, especially because the addition completely ignores the spring and ridge line of the roof, of the existing roof. The applicant should provide an axonometric of the project as proposed, but include the entirety of the building form with its attached twin. With respect to the rear yard reduction, the first floor at 20 feet is consistent with neighborhood garage encroachments. The building to the immediate rear is shown on the study with a 25-foot rear yard. if it is 2 stories, then it justifies the second floor of the proposal's rear yard reduction to 26'3", but we don't know if it is. Other adjacent properties have complying rear yards. I can't tell from the photos what the height of that rear lot building is. With respect to FAR, there are a few other houses on the social block with 1 FAR, but some, but not all of the subject of BSA special permits, so the whittling away that the person who wrote the letter was referring to, that's a similar situation for lot coverage. Anybody else?
I had a similar question with regards to the side yard. That really is my primary question.
Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 4, 2017-35 BC, 580 Columbus Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, this turns out to be a legalization. I didn't see a community board recommendation. The fire department had given us a letter, but they need to revise it now that they know it's legalization. We do need DOI. Community board, the reason we don't have a community board recommendation is they met, but they didn't yet issue their recommendation. They said they had some comments, which we don't know, so about elevations and windows and so on, but I don't think we saw their minutes yet. Did you see a CB recommendation?
No. Actually, I'm leading up to the issue of it's a legalization.
It is a legalization. You can go on their website and book a class.
The legalization, it is.
Yeah,
it's stated in
and
there,
Jay actually
in May
submitted a
18th submission.
letter
Okay, I
that
didn't-
said it's a legalization. Yeah. We are told that also that the proof of notice of hearing on 5/3/17 to officials and neighbors was submitted.
This morning.
It
It was
was
submitted Friday, and it was emailed to you guys this morning.
Okay, I didn't see that. And they did provide acoustical details, quite detailed details. So we really are just waiting for the fire department and DOI.
No, I think,
Do we have, I didn't see, fire department didn't update.
no, yeah, fire departments, they're pretty much in the similar, they said this, Anthony had mentioned in his full message to me this morning, that this is pretty similar to the other legalizations, so
But I thought that they had actually, they have an
they
inspection.
still have a couple of questions. They have a couple of
Yeah,
questions.
yeah, something like that. Okay, he'll talk about it tomorrow.
No, you
Okay.
can't talk. You're not.
But if you have something, you can submit, so,
Yes.
obviously.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's it. This concludes the public review session for June 5th, 2017.